There we go. In progress. Well, the Buceys from Oakland, California. Show us your children. We don't want to see you.
We're grabbing them.
We just might add, for those of you who don't know, Christian Bucey became Christian Bucey Esquire yesterday, admitted to the California State Bar, and sworn in a stationery store by a notary public. Hi, Henry.
There he is.
And there's
Oh,
Glenn.
there they are.
Wow, what a treat. What a treat. Well, maybe we should begin. So I just want to welcome all of you here
31.
and tell you that you are a part of what Fort Myers Congregational United Church of Christ calls GROW. It's a phrase that was made up by our former community minister. It means nothing. It doesn't stand for anything. It just sounds like a really good word to use for an educational program. I want to acknowledge the three churches who are a part of tonight's program. Certainly Fort Myers Congregational UCC, we're hosting the program and I'm the pastor there. But we're also acknowledging tonight and welcoming Asylum Hill Congregational UCC in Hartford, Connecticut, sometimes called a large church, 1,500 members with 3 ordained pastors. Jordan is the minister for early life.
Okay.
And so your first 40 years, you're under Jordan's care. And then from 40 on, you're under the care of another associate pastor. And so with 1,500 members, there's a lot of people, 0 to 40. We're also welcoming Judson Memorial Church in New York City, where Micah is the minister. And Micah is our focus tonight. His book, the Book of Tiny Prayer, that has come out of 366 days of tiny prayers that he prayed and then later assembled into this book. I think it's appropriate as we start that we would start with a tiny prayer. So let's pray. Allow us the space to open our hearts and minds and let them be expanded as we seek new ways to pray. Enlighten us in our search for meaning in our prayer lives. And may we seek new avenues for joining in the harmonious song of the universe that is prayer. May it be so. Brooks Applegate and I are going to be interrogating Micah tonight, keeping him on task and to the subject. But we're going to start with a question just to get Micah started. And then if you know Micah, he'll have no problem going for as long as we will let him go. So the first question is, Micah, how did the Tiny Prayer Project begin?
Well, first of all, I just want to say hi again to everybody. Thank you so much for being here on a Friday night. And Dad, that was a great prayer. Thank you.
I learned from the best.
I love the song of the universe that is prayer, because that was a great invitation into what we're going to talk about tonight. And I will start by saying, if you can think back to where you were at the beginning of March of 2020, do that for a moment. Just think about what you were seeing in the news, what was filling your heart and your spirit. Maybe you were just starting to get an inkling of some fear. I was just returning on March 6th, the day after my birthday, from Berlin, where I had been at the Berlin Film Festival. And right as I was leaving, hand sanitizer stations started coming out. And as I was getting on the plane, folks were wiping down seats with antibacterial cloths, and all of it seemed a bit much. It seemed like we were really entering a phase where we were taking germs very, very seriously. And I remember sort of thinking, do I really need to wipe down my seat? And my mother was flying with me, and she definitely said, yes, you are wiping down your seat. So I did, because I do everything my mother tells me to do. But when I got back to New York, I remember just as the days rolled by, kind of it getting to be more and more serious. And so the way that the Tiny Prayer Project began was that on March 24th, which was a few days into the lockdown that was starting to happen in New York City, I was running around trying to find an open bank because I worked for an immigrant justice organization that was started at Judson called New Sanctuary Coalition. And one of my jobs there was going to banks and getting cashier checks in order to bond out immigrant friends from detention. And I could not find an open bank. So all afternoon I was running around trying to find a bank that would give me a cashier's check. And while I was doing that, a news notification rolled in on my phone that said that Terrence McNally had died of COVID-19 complications. And if you don't know who Terrence McNally is, Terrence McNally was a remarkable queer playwright who, in my opinion, and I believe in the opinion of many people from the queer community, gave language and voice to an extremely scary time, the AIDS crisis, which of course continues, but at a time when I think we needed language for the fear and the need for community, the need for connection that built during that illness that ravaged so many people in so many communities. And I remember thinking, this playwright who has meant so much to me over the years, who was so gifted at giving us pieces of art that gave us language to talk about illness and talk about resilience and survival, was now dead because of COVID-19. And so without really thinking about it, I opened up my Facebook app on my phone and I just typed in about 23 words that was a tiny prayer for Terrence McNally. And it was a prayer of gratitude. It said, today's tiny prayer for Terrence McNally, 23 words, and it ended with an amen. Now, I am not always open with the public about my own prayer life. Thankfully, I get to work in a congregation where I can talk about spirituality and prayer on a Sunday morning and in prayer and meditation circle with our congregation, things like that. But I don't always go on social media and talk about my prayer life. But what happened that day was that I shared that prayer and people started to write to me about what that prayer meant, what Terrence McNally had meant to them. And the next day I wrote a prayer and posted it, and it was for healthcare workers. And the next day I wrote another prayer. And then the next day I wrote another prayer. And what ended up happening was that for 366 days, each morning I would get up, and at a time when I felt very, very overwhelmed by both the news and everything that was happening in my own mind and heart and body, I chose one thing to focus on that morning as a way of countering the overwhelm and as an invitation to others to perhaps find a way to center themselves, to check in with their breath, and to reimagine how we might individually and collectively work toward a response to the overwhelm that was happening in the news, work toward a response to the very real human emotions and complications that pop up for us every day. And it was a true gift to me because what ended up happening was that I started talking about prayer with people that I never thought I would talk about prayer with. And when I learned that when you actually put something from your heart into the world and post it on social media, that sometimes people write you back and say, that's exactly how I was feeling today. That's the thing that I didn't know how to respond to. And so that's how it began. I said I would call out Richard Morrison again in this conversation, and I'll do it. Richard is one of the editors at Fordham University Press, and Richard happens to be a Facebook friend of mine. and now thankfully a real life friend. But on the 366th day, as I was feeling in my body that because of some long COVID symptoms that had developed, I wouldn't be able to keep up the daily practice of posting prayers, I made an announcement on Facebook that thanked everyone who had been praying with me and said that I wouldn't be writing daily anymore, but that I'd share prayers that as they popped up. Richard almost immediately wrote me and said, I've been following these prayers. I'm a big fan of these prayers, and I think they would make a great collection if we just publish them all together. And from there, it became the little collection that is right here, and is the perfect size. I can't believe the care that they've taken to make it into the lovely little thing that it is. But it has become a chronicle where I've been able to look back at who I was and who I was becoming over that year. It's become a chronicle of how interactions with so many of you who are actually on the screen here tonight, and folks who are not able to be with us tonight, how interaction with you and conversation with you about prayer really shaped this practice, shaped the prayers as they continue to be written. And it's essentially a chronicle of a very messy person messily making their way through life. And if that doesn't resonate with you, then I hope that you can tell me later on how you have it all figured out. But if you also feel messy, it's an invitation to be messy and to continue to try to bend the arc of the moral universe and just get through life together. Yeah. And as you said, see, it's like pulling teeth to get me to talk. So you're probably going to have to interrupt and just ask me a different question, or else I'll just keep talking.
Brooks, are you there?
Yeah, speaking of that, just want to say thank you again, Micah, and all of the Buceys, and everybody else for coming tonight. So blessed to finally meet you all, right? I hear about you all the time from your dad, and couldn't be, if it's not Duke basketball, right? It's one of his kids. So so my next question is, obviously 2020 was a huge and transformative year for everyone. So and prayer is such a transformative experience. Micah, how have you changed over the course of writing these prayers?
Yeah, well, I haven't learned anything about basketball. So I as someone who comes from a family of sports lovers, that's one thing that I've never figured out. But how have I changed? I mean, first of all, I feel like I want that question to be there for everybody. And if you feel like sharing in the chat how you've changed, I know that it would really be lovely for me to read. I think that I learned that if you're actually authentic and share the fear that you're feeling, and don't try to look perfect and don't try to look like you have it pulled together, that it can be a form of spiritual leadership. And I don't even mean that as a minister. I don't mean that as a spiritual leader with a capital S and a capital L, because I am blessed to be trusted to be a pastor at a church that I love. But I actually think what I learned is that you can be a spiritual leader simply by living authentically in your truth, simply authentically living into the next day, as messy and as unpredictable as it is, and inviting others to just stop and breathe. I think that what I learned was that an illness that at least one symptom was stealing our breath, that checking in with your breath and thinking about how radical an act it actually is, thinking about the fact that we take for granted this magical thing that keeps us alive, that checking in with that is an act of resistance against the COVID-19 virus. It's an act of resistance against capitalism and that kind of go, go, go mentality that I think the US is very good at drilling into bodies and minds. And I think that it's also a reciprocal gift, that essentially this thing that we're doing, and I realize that we're on Zoom, so we're not sharing a space. And with this new spike, which I assume that we'll talk about, and the fear of Omicron is very real for me and so many in my life right now. So I wish that we were in a physical space together, but I also love that we can be doing this because we're bringing at least three states together. This reciprocal gift, breath, is something that you are always putting out into the world and that you are always bringing into your own body from the rest of the world. So it's the only real thing that I know of that is a truly renewable resource, that is something that we always know that we're giving and receiving at every single moment that we're alive. And I think it's a great metaphor. I like it as a metaphor, but it's literal. That literally it is the gift that we're pouring into the world, and it's the gift that we're taking from the world as well. Clearly my Beagle mix Carl Thomas Dean agrees, because he's now whining. But so that's how I changed. I think I'm much more comfortable being messy, and I'm much more comfortable just putting myself out there as somebody who doesn't have it figured out. And I think that other people had my number before. I'm not going to say that I think that people thought I had it figured out before, but I think maybe 2 years ago, I thought I might just look like I had it all figured out. So now I'm much more comfortable with people knowing the real deal.
Okay, so much for the softball questions. What do you say prayer really is?
So in the book, if you haven't read the introduction, I make a case for there being 4 main ingredients to prayer. And I would be really, really eager to hear if other folks want to share in the chat. Like if you think that I'm missing an ingredient, that is totally fine with me. And I like that dialogue. And I've been able to talk with lots of people about the shortcomings of my theory here, and it always changes me. But I think that the 4 main ingredients of prayer are attention, intention, space, and time. And so basically I think that capitalism tries to distract us. I think that the ways that we've been raised to think that it is not something worth doing to step outside of your hurried timeline, to check in with your breath, and to make sure that you are centered before you take your next step into whatever you're doing during the day. I think that it's a form of prayer to actually stop, to claim the space that you need, to actually claim the time that you need, even if it's just a minute, and even if it's just the small space that you're standing in that moment, and calling your attention to your breath and giving some kind of intention to what you need, what you want, what you're giving gratitude for, what you hope for in your own life or for someone else. Merv, I appreciate that you're giving faith there. I take faith actually as a given. I think that faith is something that we're doing just by being alive. And maybe you can call it something else. I think that there are people who, including a lot of my friends, who would say, I don't call myself a person of faith. If you want to call yourself a person of hope, do that. If you want to call yourself a person of faith, do that. I think that at the end, it's all somewhat semantics. Whether you believe in a God that's able to intervene in life, or whether you don't believe in a God, but you believe that there's power to collective energy or individual energy that you can put out into the world, I actually truly believe that whatever story you tell yourself about why you are praying, as long as you are using it well, and as long as you are not using it to punish or harm yourself, and as long as you're not using it to punish or harm someone else, that is faith, that is hope, and that is the way that we actually put intention into the world that might seem like magical thinking when you're just in the moment by yourself, but a whole world of people doing that, a whole world of claiming intention, attention, time, and quiet and space, I think is definitely, it has the power to change change the world. And I don't think that there has ever been something that, there's never been a change in the world that hasn't come from that type of praying, whether the people who are doing it have called it prayer or not. I just happen to find a particular power in calling it prayer.
Thank you again. I'd first off like to just share a tiny prayer from Micah's book, and we'll get to the question directly after it. This is from Christmas of last year, and it's entitled "For December 2021." May you be everything that we hope that you will be, packed with physical family, togetherness, stuffed with hugs and free of masks, as bright in real life as you are right now in our projected fantasies. And until you do come, may we continue to do everything in our collective and individual power to ensure that when you are unwrapped and revealed, as many of us as possible are there to greet you as the glorious gift you are, a possibility-filled future that we've not only been waiting for, but actively creating together. Amen. And so my question after this, it is now in fact, right, December 2021. You know, as you mentioned, right, the Omicron variant and all of these, you know, seemingly right messy world, right, has come in. So Micah, my question is, what is your prayer for our world right now?
Whew, you really are doing the hardball questions now. Well, I hope that we can actively co-create that right now. I'm not going to deflect and ignore the fact that you asked me the question, but I can't answer that question myself. I need this space with, 30 to 40 people figuring that out with me. That to me is the power of co-creation. That to me is, if you've never heard about something called process theology, process theology, although I'm going to oversimplify it right now, but process theology, basically has as a central thesis that we are co-creating our reality and our future with God in the moment, that we are co-creating it together with God in the moment, and that there isn't necessarily a set, past, present, and future that God has ordained, but that actually God desires us to pour our own intention, attention, time, and quiet and action into the co-creation of the future that we not only wish to see, but that we can become and are making with our action. So I think that my prayer, sadly, for next December would be that prayer again. And I think that I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't state here in this space that it seems that we are in a very similar place to where we were last December right now. And I don't bring that into the space because I don't want us to have a wonderful time together tonight, or because I want to be a downer, but because I think that actually joy, which we're in the week of joy for those who celebrate Advent, joy is something that I think is only possible when we're being truly authentic about the realities that are happening around us in the world, and still choosing to believe that there's a base level of joy that exists even beyond temporary happiness or temporary unhappiness. think joy is the way that we embody our faith and our hope in the world. And so I want to go back to, those words in the prayer for December 2021, like the fact that so much of what we're sort of challenged to do right now is to wait and say like, oh, it's going to be better in a week, it's going to be better in a month, it's going to be better in a year. Well, if we're truly honest about it, we just don't know that. And so instead, how do we spread joy? How do we spread love? How do we keep hope alive with that truth, with that knowledge? Because as true as it is that things really suck right now, it is also just as true that there are 30 to 40 people on here right now talking about prayer, talking about hope, asking questions about joy, and that is how community keeps going. That is how community keeps going in the face of all kinds of grief and all kinds of fear that remains. And yeah, that's my prayer. My prayer is that more and more people consider themselves the change and the glitter that they need to see in the world. And when they feel like they are too hopeless to keep going, that they reach out and think about that reciprocal breath that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. If you don't have the breath to pour out into the world at any given moment, well, it's magical because there's breath coming back to you from the person who has the breath to give. And I think thinking about that image is the thing that gets me through all the time, because we're not saying you can't have your low moments. We're not saying that you can't, that somebody, am I out of time?
No.
No, that was my alarm.
We're not saying that you can't have those low moments, but I do think that what my spiritual tradition tells me is that when you are at your lowest, you should reach out and say, I don't have the breath to give. Do you have some to spare? And there always is. There always is that. No matter what scarcity mindset any of this country or this world tries to tell you exists, there's always enough. There is always abundance. Every valid faith tradition that I've ever heard of, all of the stories lead to there being abundance. And so I don't know where the idea of scarcity came from, but don't believe it.
Okay, I have a two-part question. Micah, do you recall a gray-haired man approaching you late spring last year saying you should take these prayers and make them into a book? But it wasn't until Fordham University Press came along with a bigger budget than that gray-haired man had and said, let's make this into a book. Just want you to acknowledge that in front of 38 people. The second question, what do you hope readers get from the Book of Tiny Prayer?
I hope they get breath. I hope they get breath. I hope they get joy. I hope they get strength, and I hope they get hope. I think that basically the only reason that I put these prayers out into the world was because I simultaneously needed to find a way to center myself, and I needed to make sure that there were witnesses to my own story. And I think that for me, that's why anybody does anything in the world. You want to make sure that you are always finding meaning in your own story, and then you always hopefully have some witnesses who are there to tell you that they hear your story, and who maybe when you're no longer there can tell your story later. So I'm really honored that essentially, Fordham and Richard put their own resources behind making sure that this exists in a form that the story of that year, at least from my viewpoint, can exist for people to have as a package. But I hope that people really look at these prayers and can either say, well, I can write a prayer, or maybe they'll even say, well, I don't like that prayer. I can write a better prayer about that thing. And I really hope that you will. I want to show folks that all that it takes to write these prayers is to write something honest. It doesn't need to be poetic. It doesn't need to be fancy. I want basically everyone to feel like their story is worth putting out there and that somebody else needs to hear it. I know that the folks who would write to me and say, hey, could you write a prayer for this? Oftentimes they would share with me something that it hadn't even occurred to me to write a prayer for at that moment. But what I did in writing a prayer for them was that I witnessed the story that they had to tell in that moment. And so I really hope that folks just take breath and hope and joy and strength, and also hopefully write better prayers than are in the book.
That's excellent. I have one final question as well, Micah, and that is obviously the original place for all of these for these wonderful tiny prayers was on social media, right? That was their sort of birthplace. How do you see sort of social media shaping your ministry, or just ministry in general, going from here on out?
That's a great question. I hope that you'll answer that for me sometime too. I mean, I'll speak from a very, very specific place, just talking about Judson and my own experience as a pastor. But, there are beautiful Judson faces who are currently on this screen who, in the early days, I still remember, March, I think it was March 12th, this moment when I love this chat. I remember saying to our then senior minister, Donna, I think that we're really going to have to go virtual. And I was looking at this amazing leader who had been ordained for over 40 years and has done amazing, remarkable things, and has mentored so many people, including myself. And she desperately didn't want to go virtual. I could feel it, because I knew that in her experience, 40 decades of ordained ministry meant that when something this huge happened, what you did was gather in the same physical space, be together, create community in that space, share breath, literally, and try to sit through together what the fear and the grief was. We did do our first virtual service, which was live streamed, and like the camera angle was like a bit askew, and it was just the two of us sitting at a table, and we've gotten a bit better at that now. But I really do think that what I've learned is that, though I certainly don't need to name this as a silver lining, because I don't necessarily believe that we need to find and name silver linings to things that really just suck. But I think that what I learned was that a hybrid form of community, a hybrid form of worship, is not only inevitable and necessary, but can be a real blessing and a real invitation to co-creation. There are people that I see on this screen that I hadn't seen in years until we started meeting, either Sunday morning worship and having a Zoom watch party, or as Keaton pointed out, Instagram Live. I have led some meditations that way, and we also have a prayer and meditation circle that meets on Zoom every morning at 9, which started because we needed a way to connect, remotely. But I'll say what I said to Donna that first day, that virtual is real, that I think that it is very, very real. And though I love touch, I love having a physical book, I love having a physical person in a room with me, I think that what this has invited us to is really looking at really, really sucky moments as opportunities for co-creation with the people that we're working with. And I know that although I certainly have been, I'm coming up on a year since I contracted COVID, and I've been a bit of a health mess this past year. The ways that I've been in touch with people during that time when I couldn't physically be places was exactly on this platform, Zoom, and through phone. And God, I'm so glad that we have those tools. And so I think that what I hope is the future is that every community is able to figure out a hybrid way to be community. Now, I want to be very real about the fact that even at Judson, we're still figuring out how to do it. We're trying to figure out how to logistically do it, and we're trying to figure out how to pay for it. And so what I want to figure out is how do marginalized communities actually get the tools so that they are also able to build that hybrid community? Because right now, the communities that are able to do it are the communities that are resourced. And there are such amazing communities out there that I think can't quite afford it. So I really hope that there are ways that we can get resources to communities that really aren't able to do the hybrid beauty that we're doing right now.
Micah, this probably isn't a question, but you're accustomed to this. It's a statement. There's a popular Facebook post. In fact, one of my dearest friends from divinity school posted it recently. Virtual church really isn't church. Real worship takes place with people in the sanctuary, holding a hymn book, and it just goes on, very syrupy. And I just lambasted it with, that's really great thing to say to a person who's infirmed, who can't get out of their house, who hadn't been to church in years, but now they can feel connected to what goes on. And the response comes back, but real worship takes place where we're touching and clapping hands. And I just go back again, is you're not saying anything very enlightening to people who cannot get out. Fort Myers Congregational Church was just rolling along great. In the early spring of 2020, we talked about maybe having a live stream, talked about maybe doing some screens in our sanctuary. And then we had some money given to us, and then COVID struck. And I said, folks, this is only going to last a month or two. Don't panic. And Micah said to me, Dad, this is going to be a year or more. And I said, there's no way. We won't last a year. And I just want to report that every Sunday when I'm looking out at the congregation, I'm also looking at the big monitor in the back, where I also look and see, I can't see them, but in my mind, I can see them, the congregation we have who's never been in our building or haven't been in the building for a year and a half. We used to have about 110 people in church before COVID. Right now, we're having 70-ish on Sunday morning and 55 on live stream. We've received communication. We've received donations from people who've never been in Fort Myers, but they just one day hit it. And they said, "Whoa, I like this." And we don't need the money bad enough to go out and try to bring those people in, but they say, you said something we liked. And so I'm just so thankful that we were forced to do the live stream, and a very capable, loving group of unpaid people, the tech team at our church, just brought this thing together. And they act like professionals, and they're very, very exacting in what they do. But COVID forced us to re-examine some things. Old people like me, if you had told me 5 years ago that, you know what, Dave, you're going to do church for a year and a half, almost 2 years, not in the building, I would say, well, the church will close. And guess what? The church did not close. So
that's true. And I think, Dad, that the I think my favorite example of how worship and meditation and prayer can happen when it's not in a formal building or a formal sanctuary is a French Jesuit named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And Teilhard has this beautiful piece called Hymn to the Universe. And he was a paleontologist. And so he was out in the desert on a digging up a dinosaur. And basically, he realized that he had no bread or wine to have communion at the time when he wanted to have communion. And in the moment, he chose to actually just take the dust of the desert, take a stone that was there, and decide that those were his elements for communion. And when I heard that image, it just has stuck with me for so long because
I did it before
you
7.
can have worship, you can have a spiritual experience with any of the tools that you infuse with your own spirituality. And so, yes, it's wonderful to have formal spaces where we center ourselves and where you have community with you who, are bringing in tradition and history, who will help you to center, because I think it's really hard to get centered spiritually a lot of the time too. But the reason that I actually didn't address any of these prayers to a named God is because I wanted it to be a call at all times to the inherent spiritual value of everything in the universe. And so you can pray to your mask and not just pray to something called God. You can pray a prayer of gratitude to a celebrity who meant a lot to you and who changed the way that you saw the world. And that prayer doesn't have to include the word God. If there is a God, then I'm pretty sure that it's a God who doesn't care if you're always naming God. And if there isn't a God, then how magical and how special that we're still able to infuse spirituality into every single encounter, every single thing that comes into our lives each day. And speaking of that, I want to take what you were saying, Dad, and just really lift up people who know tech. There should be millions of tiny prayers for all of the people who, because I'm the kind of person who was like, we must do hybrid church. Now, please tell me how to do it. And I'm definitely the person who I can show up and I can get a microphone and I can talk, but I have no idea how any of these things are actually working. So lots of prayers to all of the people who not only have the expertise, but who also have a lot of patience for all of us who are like, well, why isn't that thing working? Because I know that I asked that a lot over the past year and a half. And I'm so grateful for people who were just sort of like, let me just do this for you. So thanks for lifting them up too, Dad. And I'm glad that Merv shared in the chat that, what you were saying is very, very true. First of all, I think it's a true dismissal of a huge portion of the population who can't get to a proper worship space, to say that you can only worship properly in a sanctuary, but also, we have really been called to think about what accessibility looks like in these times. And I think it's accessibility in terms of people physically getting to spaces. I think it's accessibility in terms of all kinds of abilities and disabilities, et cetera, in terms of how we have to think of music, how we think of, getting computers to people so that they can be properly, plugged in and doing this. But as much of a challenge as it is, what a special opportunity for us to just co-create and try to figure it all out together.
And what questions might others of you have? Well, certainly Brooks and I don't own the question market. So what questions do others have of Micah about prayer? You've answered everything.
I'm ready.
I don't have a question. It's Ted. Hi, Dave.
Ted?
I don't have a question, but and I just want to hear you talk, Micah. But it reminds me so much of my, formative years with a Jesuit education and a professor who was close to Thomas Merton. And when I read your tiny prayers and I listen to you, it brings up that to me. And when you talk about breath, now here was a man, and I was luckily able to read some of his personal letters to this woman, a nun. And here was this guy who was stuck in this Gethsemane monastery, all alone, struggling with things. But he prayed, and he was just so full of life. And it's always been something that made such an impression on me, how someone who is so sophisticated and so full of the world was so yet able to pray and listen to in silence. And sometimes when I hear you, I hear that. So that's not my question, but I'd like to know where you get it,
Thank you so much. I mean, first of all, thank you for bringing those beautiful souls in here, and I agree. I think that Thomas Merton is a huge influence for me, and I think, where do I get it? I think that I get it from you, Ted. I think that I get it from everybody who is here. I basically recognize most everybody on the screen. I see a lot of names that I recognize, and I'm like a true work in progress, And I think that when folks ask me like what I believe about prayer, the best answer that I can find is from the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who said something that I'm about to bastardize because I don't remember it word for word, but basically, he said, I don't pray because I know that it changes God. I pray because I know that it changes me. Yeah. And for me, just being in community with all of you, quite literally spending the last 50 minutes with you has been prayer to me, even though I am blessed with being the one who gets asked the questions and I get to talk. I could stay here and listen to all of you all night as well, because I've been gifted the blessing of a curiosity about life. And I think that if there was a gift that I want everyone to have, it's just a curiosity about other people, a curiosity about their own experience, because God knows I get really ornery and really annoyed, especially with myself. But as long as I move back into a place of, okay, this is a problem, you are really annoyed right now, or you really don't like this thing that happened, or this thing that this person said, or this person in general, and how can you approach this with curiosity? And I'm not saying this as a Pollyanna, although I'm happy to claim that term if folks want to give it to me. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I pray because I'm curious. I pray because I am curious about what it might do to me while it's maybe doing something to the rest of the world. And so I think I get it because I want to know why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing together, and how we can be better people.
Who else? Obviously doesn't need to be a question. It could be a comment. Oh, maybe one last, most, I think, important question. If a person doesn't have the Book of Tiny Prayer, how would they get one, Micah?
I just shared it in the chat.
Oh, I don't read chats.
And I also say this from the bottom of my heart. If there's anyone here who would like a copy, but for whatever reason doesn't have the funds to purchase it, just let me know too, because I am happy to get you a copy. It really is just something that I like to share with the world. But I want to hear what do other people, and I feel like we are in a space where we can just kind of unmute ourselves if we want. Like, what has prayer gotten you through? What questions do you have about prayer? What have I said that you need to correct? I really would love to know, like, the collective wisdom in this space. Where are you right now? Where's your heart? Where's your spirit? And what's getting you through? And what are you praying for?
It's Jane. Hi, Micah. I will say about it something that in a conversation that you and I had, I don't know how long ago, year, 2 years, whatever. I said I didn't see the purpose of prayer because I didn't really think that there was some human listening God. And, so what good would it do? And you informed me that prayer didn't necessarily have to be intercessionary, a word you taught me. And it was really, really helpful. And Kierkegaard also said, I guess somebody asked him about faith. How can you have faith? And he said, or belief in God. And he said, it's a leap of faith.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kierkegaard said amazing things.
Kierkegaard's one of my heroes.
I know that, Lauren. Lauren Andrews, I know, loves Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
Anyone else? This is a free forum. If you have something you want to say about prayer or how prayer has either buoyed you or prayer has really got you down, it's okay to say that.
Mike is absolutely right. Kierkegaard is one of my heroes. I don't know if y'all heard that or not.
We did.
Definitely.
I don't want to be seen, but I do want to be heard.
We hear you.
Hey, Merlin.
Merv,
Hey,
you've got
Jane.
your
Hi, dear.
hand up. Do you have something to say?
Well, I would say I learned to pray at a very young age in Sunday school. And the very first lesson was to give thanks. And that's always where I start.
That's
And
beautiful.
that buoys me right there. And I also put in the chat that I do my very best praying while I'm washing dishes at the kitchen sink. It's my temple for some reason, besides church, of course.
I love that, Marlon. I love the idea of washing dishes and praying amid soap bubbles. That's really beautiful. And I also love. What did you say, Lauren?
I said that's also very monastic.
Oh,
It's true. It's true. And I think in addition, while we're bringing Kierkegaard in, while we're bringing Merton in and Pollyanna and everything else, I feel like they're lining up with what you said, Marlon, about gratitude being a place to start with prayer. I love, if you don't know Anne Lamott, or if you do, one of my favorite things that she said is that the 3 essential prayers are help, thanks, and wow. And I feel like that's a great guide as well. And I also think that I feel about prayer a lot like how I feel about worship services. I kind of feel like a worship service, specifically at Judson, but perhaps other places as well. I think of it as a bouquet. We come back on Sundays because the flower might be one that smells beautiful to us and is the flower that we needed that day. And if it isn't, then you come back the next week and maybe it will be. I feel like sometimes we get stymied with prayer because we feel like it has to be the be all end all prayer to just encompass every single thing. And that was my practice here in writing one tiny prayer. It was that it is designed to only be trying to address one thing at the moment, trusting that once I put that out there, there wouldn't be someone who says, well, you didn't pray about that thing. And I'll bring in Toni Morrison in this space right now too, because Toni Morrison always said, if there's a book that you want to read but it hasn't been written, then you must write it. So if I put a prayer out into the world and somebody says, but you didn't pray about this, well then write that prayer.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Pray that prayer. And I know that, there's 366 prayers in here, which the other day I was leafing through and I was sort of like, that's a lot of prayers. But God knows it's only 366 in the billions that exist among all of us, and that we aren't always speaking from our own hearts. So I hope that also in asking what I hope that this book does, I hope that it means that for the rest of my life, I'm randomly getting prayers in my inbox and from people that might walk up to me at church and saying like, this is what I was praying about the other day. I hope that would be a real blessing to my life if people did that.
Well, I want to thank everyone for doing what you did tonight. I'm taking it all personally that we were able to put this together. I got to see all three of my children at the same time. I got to see Henry and Glenn Bucey in Oakland, California. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with you, Jordan? Why aren't your boys on here? It's 8 o'clock in Hartford, Connecticut. It's only 5 p.m. in Oakland. That's why the boys are still up. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with that boy? He's not putting his kids in bed. But it was a thrill to see them. Jordan Rebels is going to tiny pray us out.
Oh, great.
Hi, Jordan.
Hi. So I am not home right now.
Oh, that's right.
I am currently completing out my 400-hour CPE internship over the next few days. So I am here at my placement site tonight, but I'm just one of the joys of being able to connect virtually, that we can all join together from our various places. And I need to say personally, Micah, thank you. Thank you for all of these tiny prayers that you have given us. Many of you might know that when the world shut down in March of 2020, I had a 6.5-week-old baby. And it was a very, very scary time. And for me, knowing that I could go onto Facebook every day and see some beautiful love letter that my brother had gifted to the world reminded me that there was hope. So thank you, Micah, and thank you for sharing all of your wisdom tonight. And thank you, Dad, for having us. And yeah, I'm gonna tiny pray us out with a tiny prayer for the rest of our night. As we transition into the next phase of our evenings, let us take with us every word, every story, and every moment from our time here together, remembering that our hearts already know all the answers to the questions that may arise. May we close our laptops or turn off our tablets and phones and take a deep breath and seek out the places where the divine spirit of community might be leading each of us. Let us find a way to breathe in wonder and anticipation and breathe out anxieties so that we can rest tonight, ready for whatever the world may hold for us tomorrow. Amen.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Amen.
Thank you, Micah, for taking time out every day for over a year. And now he's back at it. If you're his Facebook follower, he's doing new ones every day. And it's one of the first things I do each day is look for that. It gives me inspiration. So again, thank you all for being together with us. And I'm going to hit the old end button. But before that, we will also take this recording and we'll have it on YouTube. If you want to tell any friends who didn't get to be here tonight, they'll be able to view it on there. So, are you ready?
Thank
you all so much
Good night.
for
Thank
being
you.
Thank you
here.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a great night. Keep praying.
Bye-bye.
Nicely done.